That same group, with the assistance of my father, bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. And that bombing killed 6 people and injured over 1,000 others. Is how important isolation is in radicalizing people.
Your father has killed other people. How does a 7-year-old deal with that?
Well, that's a very deep question. When I was a member of my father's extremist ideology, I feared everyone who I didn't know.
Don't let anyone else pull you down to their level.
One of the most valuable lessons that I learned from bullying was empathy.
Today, the world is getting very intolerant. Even now, do you face any kind of judgments because of your religion or your father?
What my father did was well outside of mainstream interpretation of Islam.
What motivates Zak every morning to just jump out of the bed and say, hey, I'm going to make this world a peaceful world?
I wanted people who had similar experiences to mine to know that they are not alone. How can I change? Not how can I change others. How can I change to make the world a better place?
We all can make a difference to the world. It's up to us to decide. Will we use that power for good or bad? Hi, this is Ruchi Singh from Ruchi Singh Talks, and I'm so honored to be talking to Zak Ebrahim today. I have always maintained that we are the choices we make, and he is a living example of it. Instead of being known as son of a terrorist, Zak Ebrahim chose to give himself a different identity. Today he travels all over the world trying to undo the damage which has been done by a lot of people, and he tries to create awareness against terrorism, and he works for peace. International speaker and such a powerful human being because of the big heart he has. It's my honor. So Zak, I'm so happy and so honored to be talking to you today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story and for your kind words. My name is Zak Ebrahim, and when I was 7 years old, my father, El-Sayed Nosair, assassinated Rabbi Meir Kahane, the leader of the Jewish Defense League in New York City. The JDL, as the organization was called, was described by the federal government of the United States as the largest terrorist organization operating inside of the U.S. at the time of the rabbi's assassination. To me, it was quite strange to hear some people say that it's okay to murder some people and not okay to murder others. Especially at 7 years old, it was a very strange message to have come across. My father was actually initially found not guilty of the murder. While my father was in prison on assault and weapons charges, he began plotting an attack on a dozen New York City landmarks, including the United Nations headquarters, the Holland and Lincoln tunnels, and synagogues. Thankfully, that plot was foiled by an intelligence asset who worked for the FBI and infiltrated the group. Unfortunately, in 1993, that same group, with the assistance of my father, bombed the World Trade Center in 1993. And that bombing killed 6 people and injured over 1,000 others. So what I've chosen to do with my life is to share the experience of being raised in that ideology, an ideology that preaches violence against anyone who doesn't fit into a very narrow idea of what it means to be good, including other Muslims. And how I ultimately rejected that belief. And the way I did it was by interacting with those who I was taught to hate. The first time I made a Jewish friend, the first time that I made a gay friend, they became humanized in my eyes.
Yes.
And really, one of the things that I try to focus on when I speak is how important isolation is in radicalizing people. You have to isolate them from those you wish to teach them to hate, and then you teach them these stereotypes. But it's often when you have the opportunity to interact with the other that they no longer become the other. They become a human being in your eyes. And that's really where much of my focus has been, talking about the effect of isolation, but more importantly, how interaction allowed me to reject my father's beliefs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What you have raised is a very valid point. Even in my speech, I'm going to touch upon this that conflicts begin when the sense of belongingness ends. Again, like isolation, when we are kept in silos, then it is very easy for people with set agendas to mold our thinking into the way they want to do. And thus, the kind of work you are doing is critical because coming from you, it will carry much more impact because you've lived through it and you've managed to change your own mindset. So it's a lived experience, and I'm sure it will help a whole lot of people. If I may ask, initially, when you were just seven is too young, almost a baby, for you to even process this, that your father has killed other people out of his belief that some people can be killed and it is okay to kill certain people. How does a 7-year-old deal with that? And the reason why I'm asking is because violence takes different personas. And a lot of young kids who come from violent families, it is very challenging for them to process it. And a lot of them, data shows, grow up themselves to become very disturbed and disturbing elements for the society. So how did you deal with it so beautifully?
Well, that's a very deep question. It's a question that I've asked myself many times throughout my life. The best answer I can give you is that I had 1,000 different interactions, good and bad, with different kinds of people. And I've always been a very curious person. I've always tried to understand as much as I can about what life can teach me. And when I was very young, after my father initially went to prison, I moved around a lot. I've moved 30 plus times since I was born, and living in such instability when I was young was very difficult. I was frequently bullied in school because I was always the new kid, or I was the quiet kid, or the chubby kid. And in my life, the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with was being bullied. It is the thing that has had the longest lasting negative effect on my own sense of self-worth. But one of the most valuable lessons that I learned from bullying was empathy. When I started to get old enough to begin interacting with the people that I had been taught to hate, and I directed my anger and my hatred toward them, often they showed me kindness in response. And it became impossible for me to ignore that in that situation I was being the bully. And because I had been bullied so often as a child, I knew exactly what that feeling was like. And I didn't want to perpetuate that feeling in other people. And, so I think that learning empathy from those experiences was one of the most fundamental experiences that allowed me to grow. But it wouldn't have had any effect if I had continued to maintain that isolation. The empathy is important, but what was most important for me was that actual interaction. Being able to humanize the other was really, I think, what was most fundamental to my being able to reject my father's beliefs.
Wow, seriously. And I'm so glad you opened up about bullying because so many people are bullied. And my heart breaks when I read that a child has taken the drastic step of ending their life because they were bullied too much. Anyone who's being bullied, please look at him and remember that you have the power to change your life and become an inspiration like Zak. And don't let anyone else pull you down to their level. He took kindness. Instead of hatred, he gave back kindness, and that is very critical to break that vicious cycle of any kind of violence, bullying. If we keep giving back the same thing, easier said than done, but it can be done. I have an example in front of me. So it's not just, those cliches. It can happen. So remember this. today the world is getting very intolerant. It is sad that sometimes people in the power also are not that tolerant. Even now, do you face any kind of judgments because of your religion or your father? Do you get that even now? And if you do, again, how do you manage to deal with these things?
Well, first I would say that I try to make sure that people understand that I actually am no longer a Muslim, but I say that, but it's important to me that I point out I didn't leave Islam because of my father's actions. I knew that what my father did was well outside of mainstream interpretation of Islam. I simply lost my faith. I think that a willingness to make yourself vulnerable is important. It's not always possible. It's not always possible to do it right now. But it's important that you love yourself. And if you can make yourself vulnerable in front of others, it makes them feel that they can be vulnerable. And when you have two sides that allow each other to be vulnerable with each other, that's really where I think the best kind of communication can take place. When you're no longer judging each other or have to worry about someone judging you based on your race or your religion or your gender or your sexuality, it makes it much easier for you to be honest with each other. So a willingness to be vulnerable, I think, is very important. One of the, I've been speaking for 10 years, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that 99.9% of people's reactions have been overwhelmingly positive. Frankly, I feel so fortunate and even somewhat surprised that people's reactions have been so overwhelmingly positive. But in that very tiny percentage, there are people who, at this moment in their lives, are not ready to make themselves vulnerable. They use fear as a shield.
Yes.
And I have empathy for that person. It is not easy. I understand fundamentally what it is like to live your life completely based in fear. When I was a member of my father's extremist ideology, I feared everyone who I didn't know. The next person walking around the corner, I was afraid of. That takes an enormous amount of energy to have that fear in your heart and have that hatred in your heart for people you don't know. And I think that for most people who hold that hatred, they're looking for a chance to change. I really do. I think that it takes so much energy to maintain that fear and that hatred that if given the opportunity, the vast majority of people who do hate would reject that ideology. So creating an environment where people can feel free to enter without judgment is very important.
Yes, thank you so much. We agree on so many things. When I started sharing my story of domestic violence, it was not easy. I don't like talking about my personal stuff, but I thought if not me, then who? And I was also surprised that wherever I've spoken, I've had at least 5 women or sometimes men, because men are also victims of domestic violence, come up to me and say, hey, it's happening to me or it's happening to my sister or someone. And then I realized that when we make ourselves vulnerable, and it takes courage, we actually create a very safe place for others to feel vulnerable and not have that fear of being judged and looked down upon. So, yes. And if I may ask, what motivates Zak every morning to just jump out of the bed and say, hey, I'm going to make this world a peaceful world?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not a superhero. There are some mornings where I don't wake up and I'm ready to jump out of bed and take on the world. In fact, I think one of the greatest lessons that I've learned in speaking publicly over these last 10 years is you can control very little outside of yourself.
Yes.
When I first started speaking, my hope was that I was going to take this message out to the world and I was going to change the world. And as the years went on, and I could see the impact that I was having with audiences and with groups of people. As you said, there are so many people who come up to you after you speak and have the courage to share that they're going through the same things. And that's beautiful. And, I know from personal experience, when I was a young boy, I was 16 years old, I saw a young man get on stage and share his life story. And he talked about growing up poor, being raised by a single mother, and being bullied very badly. And it was the first time in my life that I thought, someone else in this world understands what I've been through. So when I was thinking about speaking publicly, that was one of the things that I held on to. I wanted people who had similar experiences to mine to know that they are not alone. It's so easy when you're isolated, when you're going through traumatic events, to feel like you're the only person who's been through this experience, you're the only person who can understand, no one else knows what I've been through. But when you have the opportunity to engage in an environment where people can make themselves vulnerable, as we've been talking about, that feeling that you are not alone is so empowering. And, one of the other major motivating things, I feel so fortunate because my job is to go all over the world and to interact with people who are trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, like
So
this event.
exactly. So my job takes me to interact with people who are working every day to try to make the world a better place, and that to me is the most motivating aspect of it, really.
Yes. Yes, it is wonderful. We are lucky that way. Right.
Very
Yes.
much so.
All right. So it has been like amazing talking to you.
Thank you.
And seriously, I'm honored to know someone like you who's taken something so challenging and so disruptive, and it had all the potential of going the other way. And here, look at you. You are a change maker, and I'm very proud. Is there anything else you want to share with my audience?
Yes, I'd love to. I would say that for the time that we live on this earth, the world is getting worse or it's getting better. And the experiences that we have with others determine that direction. So do you want to live in a world where you are putting it further in the right direction, whether you are pursuing peace or kindness or nonviolence? Or do you want the way that you live your life to make the world a worse place?
Yes.
And I think the vast majority of people in the world would say, I want to live a life that makes the world a better place. So don't think about how you can change others. Consider your life,
Yes.
how your lifestyle affects others, how the choices that you make
Yes.
affects not just yourself or your family or your community, but people on the other side of the world. Because really one of the most important lessons that I've learned in my life is that our choices matter.
Oh, yes.
Even when we think that we have no power, we still do have agency, and that our choices do matter, and that they matter not just to us, but to many other people. So being cognizant of the way that we live our lives in a positive way for others, I think is very important. To look inside yourself and ask yourself, how can I change? Not how can I change others, how can I change to make the world a better place?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So you heard Zak. All of us have immense power within us. We all can make a difference to the world. It's up to us to decide. Will we use that power for good or bad? Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.